Hello ladies and gentle ladies, and welcome back to another Forge modding tutorial for Minecraft 1.20. And in this tutorial we're going to be creating an entity. So let's get started. So the first thing we want, as usual, is to create a new registry class, and that will be called EntityInit. And in here we want, same as usual, our public static final. Let me just turn Copilot off. Public static final deferred register of type entity type. So not entity, entity type, and just put your wildcard in there. And generally I will just call this the entities, but you can call it entity types if you want. And that is equal deferred register.create forge registries.entitytypes, and then your mod ID tutorial mod.mod ID. Okay, then we want our registry object of entity type, and in here we will put the class of our entity. So I'm just going to call this example entity, and we'll once again name the field the same thing, is equal entities.register. Example underscore entity will be my name. Once again, same as I've said a billion times, that needs to be lowercase, no spaces, no special symbols, etc, etc. And this will be equal to a supplier of entity type dot builder, and that will be dot of. And in here we first need an entity factory of an entity. Effectively that will just be calling our constructor of our entity class. So all you need to do for that is example entity : new, and we'll see that will work later. And then it also wants an entity classification, or is it not called that anymore? I always forget what this is called. They've changed it quite a lot recently. It is the mob category. There you go. Mob category dot, and then you can set the category of your entity. Now, depending on what you set this to, this will change certain attributes regarding your entity, mainly about spawn placements, so where it can spawn or not. For example, if you put monster, it will only be able to spawn under certain light levels, and water will have water spawn rules, etc. Now I'm just going to put a normal creature for this, since I'm not going to really be doing anything special with it. And then we can set some extra properties on here if we want. So we can do, for example, things such as can spawn far from player. You have whether or not it's fire immune. You can say if it can be summoned. You can have feature flags, etc, etc. Most of these I'm not going to even touch. However, the one that we do need to do is the sized one, and this specifies our hitbox size for the entity. Now, I currently don't know what size it's going to be until I create the model, so for now I'm just going to put 1.0 for those sizes, and in the future we can come back and change that to what we need it to be. Then all we need to do is just .build, and this requires a string. So what I like to do for this is just create a new resource location that takes in our mod ID, and then the name of the entity again, so example underscore entity, and then I just do .to string on that. Okay, and you'll obviously see we do have some errors here because our example entity class doesn't exist. But before I talk about that, let's talk about the entity type, because you may be a little confused in terms of what that actually means and what it is. So an entity type effectively defines the type of entity that it is. It's not the actual entity. So when you register in entity type, you're not registering a specific entity per se. You're registering just the type of entity that you want. For example, when you register a cow, you're not registering an actual cow, you're just registering the information to create a cow. That's effectively what is happening here. We're not creating an actual entity by doing this. We're just creating the information that will be used to later create that entity. And that's the same with most things we register. So when we're registering items and blocks, it's pretty much exactly the same. We're not registering that actual instance of the block or the actual instance of the item. We're registering the information to create a new in-game item or block. And yeah, that is the same for most of the registries that we create using deferred registers. For example, block entities will be exactly the same. We have a block entity type. Menus will be the same. We have a menu type and some other things as well. So let's create this example entity class. So we're going to want to come into our main package and create a new package. And I will just call this entity. And inside of here, I'll create a new class called example entity. And you'll see that error should go away once we just import that class. Obviously, this still gives an error because it needs to be of a specific type. So I want my entity to just be a normal animal. So all I'm going to do here is just extend animal. And actually, before we continue, let's go ahead and register this deferred register inside of our main class so that we don't forget to do it later. So we'll do entity init.entities.register and bus. Okay, then let's come back into our entity class. So I'm extending animal because I just want it to be an animal. However, if you wanted it to be, say, a monster, you would just extend monster. If you want it to just be a generic living entity, you would just extend living entity. If you don't want it to be living, for example, say a minecart or a armor stand. Armor stands are actually living, but that's a whole different thing. Things like that, which don't really live and have AI and stuff, then you could just extend entity. Obviously, making sure you extend the correct entity here, so the Minecraft one, not, another one. But I'm going to be extending animal. You can also extend something maybe a little bit more higher level, right? For example, you could extend pig, and then you'd get most of the pig stuff. You could extend, say, abstract horse, and you'd get most of the horse stuff, etc., etc. Obviously, you can't extend two classes because, multiple inheritance isn't a thing in Java. But you can always copy things from certain classes and move them inside of here. Okay, let's create what it wants. So it's going to want some methods that we want to implement. Now for us, that will be get breed offspring, because we have an animal, and animal extends ageable mob, which has this get breed offspring method. But obviously, if you're extending something like monster, then you're not necessarily going to have this breeding method. In here, effectively, all we want to do is just return a new example entity, and we can just pass in the level and also this .block position. And you can also set attributes from the parent as well. This is just like a very basic way to do this. You might want to copy across certain attributes and make sure it works perfectly fine with your specific mob. Let's actually just rename this real quick so that this is the level and this is the parent. I actually think this is the mother specifically, I think. But I'll just call it parent like that. Or I'll call it other parent because I guess this instance here is the actual parent and then this is the other parent. But regardless, we are now going to need a constructor, and we're actually going to remove this entity type part. We're going to rename this level to level, and we're actually going to want to take in, let's see, what do we need as the constructor? What does this ask for? So let's come into here and we can see in the entity factory, it looks for a constructor with entity type and level. So actually we do want that constructor. Let's bring that back. So this will be the type and this will be the level. And we do want that constructor. So if we just make that public and come back into entity init, you can see our error has gone. But we're also going to want maybe 2 other constructors here. So we're going to want example entity that takes in a level and 3 doubles, which will be the X, Y, and Z positions. So a level, and then double X, double Y, and double Z. And all we can do with this one is just call this, and then like entity init dot example entity dot get, and then level. So that will just call this constructor here, and we're passing in our registered entity type that we created in here. And then we're just going to want to set pos X, Y, Z. And then we're also going to make another constructor, which will just take in a straight up block position or a block pos. And all we do is do this, and we can call level position.x, position.y, and position.z. And that will just call this constructor, which calls this constructor. Now we do actually seem to have an error here. Let's see what that's going on about. So what constructor does it want then? Interesting. So the issue here is that our constructor here is using a wildcard that extends animal. Now what this should actually be is just an entity type of example entity. And if we go back into entity init, that actually has not solved the problem. Let's just make sure this is public. It is public. Okay, what we might need to do then is before this of method, right, after the dot but before the of, we just want to put these triangle brackets and say example entity, and you'll see that then fixes that error there, and that just makes sure that this of method is still using our example entity for everything. Okay, fantastic. So let's move on to AI. Let's create some AI for our entity. Now, I'm not going to show you how to make your own AI because that's extremely complex. And maybe in a future tutorial, I might cover that if you guys want to see it. However, I will show you how you can add vanilla AI, and then you can always just look at the vanilla AI to see how you could implement your own. So what we want is the register goals method. We want to override that. Now, if you're extending something like pig, you might want to make sure you call this super method because that will add the default goals that are in your super class. However, since I'm extending animal, there are no default goals, so we don't need to call super. And all we need to do in here is this .goal selector .add goal, and then first you have the priority. So lower the priority, the more often or the more frequent it will do that specific goal. So as goal 0, you generally want to put something like a new float goal, and this just makes sure that like when it's in water it will float, right? So it doesn't just sink. That's generally what people put as a priority 0, since that's quite important. Then you have goals like panicking, breeding, following parents, water avoiding, looking at players, random looking, and tempting. I'm just going to copy paste some of those in from my previous ones. So as you can see, I've added panicking, I've added breeding, following parents, water avoid, random strolling, looking at player, and random look around. And I'm also going to add a tempt goal so that this entity can be tempted by a specific food. So I'm going to do goal selector .add goal. I'm going to put the priority one more down, so 9, and then I'm going to say a new tempt goal, and we'll see that it wants first the mob, which is this. Then it wants a double, which is basically like the speed that it will be tempted by. Generally, I just put 1 for this since I don't know exactly what that does. Then it wants the ingredient, which would define what the item is that it gets tempted by. So we can say ingredient.of, and I'll just use my example item, since if you remember we made that a food as well. So item init.example item, if we can find that, there we go, .get, and then also there is a boolean for whether it can be scared. I believe this is used for when you're taming cats, for example. I'm just going to put a false for that. Now, generally for goals, you want to make sure you put these in the order that they are prioritized by. You don't have to, of course you can put them in any order, but generally I think it just makes more sense to like have highest priority at the top, lowest priority at the bottom, so that it's easy to read for anyone who comes into this class at a later date, or for you if you come into this class at a later date. And you can add any other goals here as well. If you want to see a whole list of goals, you can just come into, say, one of these and come into the goal class, and if you right click it and say go to implementations, you'll see it brings up this massive pop-up here, and you can scroll down and these are all of the different goals. Now the important thing to note is that a lot of these goals may be specific to a certain entity. So you see, for example, the dolphin swim to treasure goal is inside of the dolphin class. And that means that you probably won't be able to use that goal for your entity because it will probably only allow a dolphin. So if you say wanted to use that goal for your entity, you would have to just copy it in the code and change all of the references to dolphin to be your entity. It's a bit annoying that they work that way. I wish that a lot of these entities had it be a little more generic, but obviously you've got to remember a lot of these goals are going to use information from that specific entity class to be able to define how that goal should work in the specific situation. It is what it is. You'll probably have to copy some of these across if you want your own goals. Say for example this raider goal here, right? Raider move through village goal. You'll see this takes in a raider, right? Which our entity isn't a raider, so we wouldn't be able to use this goal. Also, this is just a static class, so we can't even access it anyways. So it's package protected. So if we wanted to use this goal, we would have to actually copy paste this whole goal class, paste it in and change the raider stuff to our stuff and etc. But I think you get the point with that. So that is AI. And also there is a system known as Brains, which you can use too, which is like for more complex AI. Brains are a lot better, but they are also a bit confusing. I will leave a link in the description to this. There is a library mod for, I believe, Brains that makes Brains a lot simpler and a lot easier to use. And yeah, I'll leave that in the description because I think that might be helpful if you want to make more complex AI. Okay, and obviously with entities you can override any methods in here that you want. For example, you might want to say like on hit. Hit, is that a method? Hit entity hurt. Let's see, hurt. There you go. So when this entity is hurt, you have the method where you could do anything you want, right? I'm not going to go through all of those methods because you can see that there are tons. If we come down to here, you can see there's loads of different methods that you can override. So I'm not going to go through all of those. It's literally hundreds. So yeah, there's all of those. But there are two more things we want to do with our entity class. The first thing is we need to create the attributes for our entity. And these define things like the max health, speed, the damage, etc. So what we'll do is we'll go public static attribute supplier, there it is, dot builder, and I will just call this create example attributes. And in here we can return, now we can return a few different things in here. So we could return, for example, a new attribute supplier dot builder, and not a new, just builder like that, and add your attributes like this, or alternatively you can use existing attributes. So since we're using animal, we can say return animal dot create living attributes and create mob attributes, and these are kind of like default attribute settings. So you see here mob attributes, it sets a follow range and it adds attacking knockback, and it uses the living attributes to add max health, knockback resistance, movement speed, armor toughness, swim speed, let's see, name tag distance, entity gravity, step height addition. You'll see some of these attributes are from the Forge mod class, and those are because those are Forge specific attributes. But all of the vanilla ones are inside of the attributes class, and you can also register your own attributes, by the way, if you wanted to do that for whatever reason. So I'm going to use the mob attributes. It's important to note that other classes may have their own attributes too. For example, monster, I believe, has create monster attributes like that. So you can use those if you're extending monster. And things like pig, for example, I believe also have their own attributes. Maybe like dolphin dolphin has this create attributes method, which creates the attributes for that specific entity. So I'm actually going to go to pig, because I believe pig did have that and I just completely missed it. Yeah, it did. And I'm actually just going to copy what pig does, which is these attributes here. I'm going to paste those in, and that means the attributes of this entity are basically going to be the same as pig. Let's just call it create attributes. Actually, I think it is a better name, really, isn't it? And boom, that would work. Alternatively, actually, since I'm not going to change that, I could just call it pig create attributes. That would be a lot simpler, really, wouldn't it? The final thing we need to do in our entity class is we need to create some spawning rules. And these are the rules that are used when spawning our entity in the world. So if you're not going to have natural entity spawning, then obviously you don't need to worry about this. For example, if it's the Wither or Ender Dragon, they don't have the natural entity spawning. But I want my entity to spawn in the world, so we're going to need a public static boolean. This will be called can spawn. Now this will take in an entity type of example entity, so our entity class, and I'll call this the entity type. And then we want a server level accessor, which is just the level. Then we want a mob spawn type, which is the spawn type. Then we want a block path, which is the position. We also want a random source, which is a random. And in here you can create whatever spawn rules you want for this entity. So since I'm using animal, once again it's the same with attributes. I can just call animal dot check animal spawn rules, and actually I believe this is just a normal level accessor now. And I can pass in all of these different things in here. So entity type, level, spawn type, position, random. And I can also add any additional checks in here. So I could say, for example, and level dot is raining, or level dot, can I do that? Get level data dot is raining. There you go. So I could do, for example, that as well. I could also say and position dot y, is greater than 40, and you could do any other checks that you want as well. I'm going to remove both those conditions because it just makes it a bit harder to try and find them if I have conditions like that. So I'll remove those conditions and just use the normal animal rules, which check for the spawnable tag and also whether or not it's bright enough, which I think is fine just for this example entity. Fantastic. So next, let's move on to the entity renderer, so we can get our entity rendered. What we're going to want to do is create a new package. Now I like to just call this the client package, and inside there we want another package for renderer. And let's create a new package as well in there for client model. Okay, let's come into the renderer package and let's create a new class. We'll just call this example entity renderer. Okay, and since I'm using a mob, I can just extend mob renderer. However, if you're extending, say, something humanoid, you might want to use a humanoid mob renderer. If you're extending what else? Just a living entity, you would use living entity renderer. And if you're extending just entity, you might use an entity renderer. But I'm going to go back to mob renderer. Okay, let's implement the methods. So get texture location, and it's also going to want the constructor as well. Now you see this is raw, so we need to put in some things into here. We first want to specify our entity class, which is example entity, and then we're going to want to give it a model, which will be example entity model, and we'll create that obviously later. Now what we do need to do is now actually re-implement these methods here, and we're going to remove this entity model from the constructor up here, and also the float as well. We don't want that either. Let's rename this context to context or CTX and rename this to entity. What we're going to want to do in the constructor here is we'll leave this one for now. So this will be the model, this null. And this parameter here is the shadow size for your entity. I'm just going to put 1 for now. In this get texture location method, we want to return a resource location of our texture. Now you can do things depending on your entity here. So you could say, for example, if entity dot is in powdered snow, then you could return like texture 0, else, you know, return texture 1. You can do things like that, for example, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to return just one texture. So let's do public static final resource location texture is equal to a new resource location. Put in our mod ID, tutorial ID, and then we want textures /entity /example underscore entity dot png. Okay, fantastic. And I'm actually going to make that private since that can just stay in here. It doesn't need to go anywhere. And then all we can just do is just return texture in there. Fantastic. So let's create the model now. So what we're going to want to do with the model is we're going to say a new example entity model. Obviously we don't have that class yet, but that's fine. And inside of the constructor, we just want to do context.bake layer. And we're going to say example entity model dot layer underscore location. And this actually here, this model will make that generic as well. Obviously that doesn't exist right now, but we'll create that later. Okay, the next thing we need to do is register some stuff here. So let's create a new package inside of our root for events. And inside of here, I'm going to create a new class for client mod events. Okay, same as with creative tabs, we want to do mod.eventBusSubscriber. We're going to first specify our mod ID, tutorial mod.mod_id. Then we want the bus. This is the mod bus, so we're going to use bus.mod. Then we want to also specify that it is this.client. Once again, you don't need to do that, but I would like to just so that I remember. In here, we're going to want an @subscribe event. This will be a public static void. I will call this register renderers. This will take in the register renderers event, and all we need to do is event.register entity renderer entity init .example entity.get, and then just example entity renderer : new. Okay, fantastic. And I'll just create this other event for now, but we'll fill it out in a second. So we're gonna want another @subscribe event in here. This will once again public static void. This will be called register layer definitions, and that will take in a register layer definitions event, and we'll fill that out later. For now, we don't need to worry about that. Okay, let's also create another class in here, and this will be called common mod events. Okay, and this needs to be once again @eventBusSubscriber mod ID tutorial mod.mod_id. We want to specify the bus.mod. Okay, in here we want @subscribe event. We want public static void. Now first we're going to do the entity attributes. So we're going to say entity attributes. And this will be entity attribute create event, entity attribute creation event. There you go. And inside of here, we're just going to do event.put. we're first going to give it our entity init.example entity.get, and then we're just going to say example entity.create attributes.build. Fantastic. And we're also going to want to register our spawn placement. So let's do @subscribe event public static void register spawn placements. This will be the spawn placement register event. And once again, event.register. First give it our entity type, so entity init.example entity.get. Then we need to give it a spawn placement type. So we're going to say spawn placements dot type dot, and we can say sort of the type that it should spawn with. So I just want it to spawn on the ground, but if you want it to spawn in water or in lava or have no restrictions, then you can use those. But I'm going to use on ground. Then we need to specify a height map. So we can do height map dot heights dot, and then you have these different types. So for example, ocean floor. I'm going to use world surface. So I want it to spawn on the world surface. Then we're going to need our predicate that we created in our entity class. So that will just be example entity : can spawn. And then we want an operation for our registering. So spawn placements register event dot operation dot, and then you have and or replace. I'm going to use or. And that just means that if there was another placement registered to this entity, it would say that placement or this placement. And you can use that to, for example, replace vanilla entities placements. So you could say operation.replace, for example, would replace this placement for the entity you provide. You could also say and, which would require that it's this placement and the other placement. For example, if we're replacing a vanilla entity in here, you might have, say, entity type dot ally, right? And in that case, you might go ahead and use and. Obviously, this is going to give us some errors because like our predicate is wrong and etc. etc. But yeah, we can take this back to what we had before. There we go. So that's our spawn placement registered. Let's just move this onto a new line here. In fact, let's put these all on their own line. There we go. Okay, fantastic. So we've done pretty much everything that we need to do now. All we have left is the model, the loot table, and also a biome modifier. Let's first do the biome modifier, which is for the spawn placement, which tells it like what biomes it should spawn in and like how many, the max count, etc. So let's come into resources, data, and inside of here we're going to want to come into tutorial mod. Then we're going to want a new directory for Forge and another directory inside of that for biome_modifier. And inside of there, we're going to want a new file. Now I will just call this what my entity is called. So example_entity.json. Okay, inside of here, we first want to specify a type, which will be the type of this modifier. So what like default template it would use. Now we want to use Forge : add_spawns. Then we want to specify the biomes that it should spawn in. So I just want it to spawn in any overworld biome. So I might use Minecraft : is_overworld. And it's important that you put your hash before this as well, because what this is this is a tag. Alternatively, you can specify a singular biome in here by doing Minecraft : for example, plains, and that would mean the plains biome. But I want a tag for the overworld. There's also a never tag and enter tag here. Now, if you want to specify your own group of biomes, you can create your own tag for that. So as you'll see in tutorial mod here, we have this tags folder. We might want to create a new directory. So tags, and we'll say /biomes. And inside of here, you might create your own tag. So example underscore biomes.json. First, you would say your values, which you want to first replace, replace false. And then you can say your values, and you can specify your group of biomes in here if you want. Now, I'm not going to do that. I just want to use the overworld as I said, but that's how you would create your own list of biomes, and then you would just use that in here. So keep the hash, of course, and then you just say your mod ID, so tutorial mod : and we called it example underscore biomes, right? Is that what we called it? Something like that. And that's how you would define that. Once again, I'm going to keep it as Minecraft is overworld. Then we need to specify the spawners. So we're going to say spawners, and this specifies how it should spawn. So first we want to specify the entity type, which we registered as tutorial mod : example underscore entity. Then we want the weight, which is basically how many there will be. So I'm just going to say like 75. That means it's going to be super common, and we should be able to find it really easily. Then we want to specify a min count. So this is basically the minimum that there could be in a single spawning group. I'm just going to say 2 per group at minimum, and I'll say a max count per group, I'll say 8. So that means every time it spawns, there will be at least 2 and at max 8. And that'll be a weight of 75. A higher weight means it's more common, by the way. Okay, so we can close that. And let's do the loot table as well while we're here. So let's create a new directory, loot underscore tables / entities. And I'm going to use misode for this. So misode.github.io, and we're going to want loot table. And in here, we can specify a preset, and we're going to want an entity. So we'll say entities, and you have all your default entity presets in here. I'm just going to say like creeper, for example. Let's make sure this is 1.20, by the way. And you have your whole loot table function. Let's actually use something maybe like the gas, since the gas drops 2 things, right? Gunpowder and gas tiers. And you can see here up in the preview the different things that it would drop per seed, right? So here's all your different seeds. And we can specify our own items in here. So for example, in replacement of gunpowder, I might want tutorial mod : example underscore item. And in replacement of the ghast tier, which is up here, I might want tutorial mod : example underscore block. And then you can obviously modify any of these as you wish. I'm not going to explain this because these are quite a complex loot table, but I'm going to copy that. Let's close that. Once again, that site will be in the description. And inside of our entities directory, we're going to want example underscore entity.json, and just paste that in there. And actually, where it does say the random sequence down here, we can just leave that blank. In fact, can we just not specify it? What did we do for the block? Let me check. So yeah, we can actually just not specify the random sequence. If you want to add your own random sequence, you can do that, of course. What we need to do now is we need to create our entity model, and then we need to register the layer definition. So let's close some of these things. Yeah, we'll leave this open since we're going to need that. And also here, actually, where it says the model, we're just going to put a question mark for the wildcard in there. Or actually, we can say just example entity is fine. Okay, so to create the model, we're going to be using something known as Blockbench. So let's open Blockbench, and once again, a link to the Blockbench installer and website will be in the description. And I've already created this model. I created this for the 1.19.3 tutorial, but I'm just going to use this so that I don't have to create a model. I'm not going to explain how Blockbench works, because there's a lot to it, but just note that you need to create it as a modded entity. That's very, very important that you create it as a modded entity, and that all of your cubes are inside of one root cube, ideally known as the body. As long as everything is inside of that root, you should be okay. Anything that you want to be animated, you need to put in its own folder, or bone, or root. So as you can see here, I've got the head in its own, I've got the legs each in their own, and etc. Now once you've created your entity, obviously make sure you create a texture for it as well. I'm just using the default kind of like template texture, so I don't have to go ahead and texture it. And also, if you do intend on animating, you want to make sure you set your pivot points. So for example, if I go to the back leg here and I go to the pivot tool, you can see that my pivot is actually in the wrong place. So you'll just want to move that. Actually, I don't want to do that. I want to do that for the group. You need to make sure your group is in the correct place up here. You can do it for the cube as well, actually, if you want to be safe. So just do that and make sure that's in the right place, and you can do that for all of your different ones. Some of mine seem to be right and some of them seem to be wrong, so I'm just going to go through and quickly move some of these into the correct location. You see actually the back right is correct there, the cube is correct, so all of these are correct. Front left correct. Check that the legs are in the right place. So for example, the legs, you might want to move the pivot point up to like around here somewhere, and just check that that hasn't moved any of these, of course, which it hasn't, which is fantastic. Obviously the body, make sure that's in the center, and the head you want somewhere roughly around where the pivot would be. And just check, yeah, body has the right pivot point, head has the correct pivot point, and fantastic. So that's, once you've got all of that done, you can go ahead and file, and you can export, and you need to export as a Java entity. You see I have tons of different things in here, but we don't need those ones. We only need the Java entity. So let's export that, and you're going to want to make sure you put that in the correct place. So I'm just going to find the folder I need here. Okay, so I want it in my tutorial mod, of course, and then I want it in source, main, Java, dev, dirty tutorial mod, and we want it in client, model, and I'm just going to call this example entity model, and hit save. Then we can also make sure we save the project as a BB model. Generally, I just like to put this somewhere in my mod project as well. I'll create a new folder in the root for BB models, and I'll save it in there. Then we can close Blockbench, and if we come back in here, you should see our model has loaded, but it's going to have a lot of errors, so we need to change some stuff in here. First of all, let's fix the class name. So example entity model. You'll see IntelliJ will try and fix some of this as well as we're going along. Where we've got t-extent entity, this needs to be t-extent example entity. And we need to set the package declaration up here. Let's delete this Blockbench comment and these comments as well. We don't want the comments. Where it says our mod ID and a string here, we just want tutorial mod.mod ID. And where it says custom model here, you just want to put main. Or actually, no, not main. You want example underscore entity. My bad. And obviously make sure it's main there. And let's see, anything else that we can fix? So set up anim. We do need that for your animations, but if you don't use your animations, you can basically just ignore that method. Here we have a bunch of different variables. I'm just going to remove these variables since I actually don't need them to be their own variables like that. And obviously you can format these to be a little bit neater rather than one massive line. Things like mesh definition up here, you can rename to be how you want them to be named, just so it's a little bit cleaner. And everything is easier to understand. And once you've got all of that down, we can go ahead and save it, of course. Make sure everything's right. So everything looks fine to me. And okay, so we can close that now, and you'll see if we come back into our renderer, all of those errors are fixed. And now inside of our client mod events, inside of the register layer definitions, we can do event.register layer definition. We want our example entity model .layer location, and then we want example entity model : create body layer. Okay, once you've done that, you can close that class. We can close our renderer, and all we need to do now is just make sure we have our texture in the right place. I'm going to go tutorial mod, side of the resources, of course, assets, tutorial mod, textures. Side of here, we're going to want a new directory or entity, and we're just going to paste and make sure it's called exactly what you called it in your renderer here. So textures, entity, example, entity.png. And it needs to be the same texture size that your model specifies. So our model down here specifies that it's 64 by 64. So if we come in here, you can see this is a 64 by 64. And that should be it. I'm sure I've forgotten something since there's so much to go through. Oh, we do need to do the lang, actually. So let's come in here. Let's say entity.tutorialmod.example_entity. And let's just say example entity. Fantastic. So now we can run the game, and hopefully everything should work. Alright, so there is actually one thing I forgot, and that is spawn eggs. So if we want to create a spawn egg, how do we do that? So let's come back into our init package, and let's go into item init. And inside of here, we're going to just register a new item, basically. So we want public static final registry object. This will be of type forge spawn egg item. I'm going to call this example spawn egg, and that's equal to items.register example spawn egg. Then we want just the normal stuff, so a new forge spawn egg item. First, we need to give it our entity type as a supplier, so we can just do entity init .example entity, since if you recall, registry objects are just suppliers. Then we need to give it the background color. So this is basically what I like to call the primary color. Now this can just be a hexadecimal, or you can use decimal if you want. I don't know why you would do that, but you can. But this is the hexadecimal. So we do 0x, and then you can give it whatever hex value you want. I'm just going to copy what I used from 1.19.3, which is F0ABD1, which is going to be some kind of, it's going to be slightly red white, so slightly pinkish maybe, is what I'm thinking. And then as a highlight color, or the secondary color if you will, I used AE4C82, and I'll leave a link in the description to a hexadecimal color picker so you can get your hex value from that. Let's see, what would this one be? This would be like slightly blue in a way, and red, so slightly purplish, I suppose. It's hard to tell. Very hard to tell from that kind of thing. But so then we just want the properties. Once again, item.properties. Okay, fantastic. So that's all we actually need for the spawn egg, other than the lang. So once again, item.tutorial mod.example _entity _spawn. Is that what I called it? Example entity _spawn egg? That's not right. What did I call it? Example spawn egg. There you go. So example spawn egg. What do vanilla call it? I believe they just call it like spawn example entity. And then we want the model as well, which is going to be super simple. So we want a new file and example spawn egg.json. In here, all we need to do is specify parent Minecraft :item /template. Oops, /template underscore spawn underscore egg, and that'll just let it use the template for the different colors and etc. Obviously, if you didn't want to do it like that, you could just specify a normal like texture for your spawn egg if you wanted it to be special. That's perfectly fine too. Okay, fantastic. So now we can actually run the game again, and this time it should all work. If we go into our creative tab, we can actually see it's not in here because I did forget to add it to the tab, so that's actually my bad, but we can just /give it anyways. It's a little bit annoying, but it's not the end of the world. And yeah, pink and purple as I expected, and if we place it down you can see it exists. It moves around randomly. If I hit it, it should panic. Yep, it does. And if it goes in water, like down here, it should float. Is there any chance I can get it to do that? Yep, there you go. You see it comes up and it floats, which is the floating goal. And yeah, it should also be able to pathfind to this block here, of course. Might have to give it a little bit of a nudge. But you see it has health and everything, of course, needless to say. And if I kill it, it should also drop our example item, and in the off chance, our example block as well, which is fantastic. You see that works pretty much exactly the same as a ghast loot table would. Okay, let's also try and see if we can get it to spawn in the world. So if we just fly around a little bit. Oh, there's some cows. There you go, there's some. Fantastic. And you see they spawn in like a size of, this one's a size of 4. And there's probably loads more around here as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So obviously I hope you found this tutorial useful. Yeah, obviously if you did, please do be sure to give it a like and subscribe. If you have any problems, you can obviously join my Discord server, which is linked in the description below. Yeah, I'll see you in the next tutorial. Goodbye.